Hey everyone, how's it going? Thank you for joining. My name is Diego. I am with the support team at Designlab. And with me, I have Kieran. He is one of our top designers at Designlab. As you know, since you signed up for it today, we're gonna be going over Figma, or he will be going over Figma. And I will be here just to assist him. If you've attended a webinar before, basically Kieran will let us know everything that he's gonna present today, and we will go through questions at the end. If we find any relevant questions that that we feel like we can jump in while he's going through, we will. But again, we'll leave all of the questions at the end. Again, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Diego with the Designlab team, and I am giving it up now to Kieran.
All right. Hey, everybody. I'm going to first start off by, jumping right into screen sharing. So let me just get that up and running. So let's do that. Actions, enable screen sharing, and let's do the entire screen. Okay. So as Diego mentioned, we're going to have a question section at all times. So if you have any questions, I'll answer a few of those towards the end, because I'm sure that there'll be a whole bunch of stuff that like everybody wants to look into. So let me share my screen and turn off notifications. Awesome. All right. And as you can also see in the chat with my little inception window here, is that I've got a few links. The first is my YouTube channel, which I'm starting out, which is going to be helping out designers with redesigns. So taking stuff where people have designed it themselves, like as some of my students have, and then me coming in as a senior designer and then helping them out and trying to do that. So that's leveling up in terms of Figma and other design tools. You'll also see figma.com, pretty straightforward. And then you'll also see figma.com/events. And what that's really good for is actually Figma themselves host a whole bunch of webinars all the time. So if you're ever wondering like, okay, well, cool, like I'd really want to learn even more than what Kieran's going through today, Figma does do stuff as well. And we also will be doing this as an ongoing thing because we hear a lot of students wanting to know just that little bit more. So today we're starting off at the absolute basics to get started, but eventually we'll get into more advanced stuff like creating components and then creating responsive layouts and so on and so forth. And even later down the track, I even want to go from how do we go from something like Figma into Webflow? How do you make that transformation? So yeah, let's start off with what Figma is. And like I said, this is an absolute basics course. So for a lot of you out there, this might be a little bit overkill in like over explanation, but I really wanted to start off with like, what is Figma to begin with? And really it's a tool for UI design and prototyping. So in that we have a tool that, like as you can sort of see from their homepage, you're able to create like visual UIs or graphical UIs. So what you usually refer to as GUIs, like GUI. And it's largely a web-based product, meaning that the core of it is based on web. So what comes with that is a few advantages of things like collaboration and being able to see things a lot quicker. So other tools out there like Adobe XD and Sketch are also doing this, but they started off with more of a native understanding of the platform, which means that they just do it in their own different way. So the way that I sort of think about Figma is we used to have like we used to have like Microsoft like Word and Microsoft Excel. I mean, we still do. But it started off as a native application, right? Something that you would download from the App Store or download from like a site's web, like a company's website, and then it'd be on your computer. But then then Google Docs came around and everything was in the browser. That's kind of like what Figma is. So Figma, and just like Google Docs and all that kind of stuff, they do have native app versions, right? So like iOS and Android have native app versions. Figma does the same sort of thing. Its core is in web, but it actually has a native Windows app and a native like Mac app. And I say native with heavy quotation marks because I'm pretty sure it's Electron based. It's not exactly a native app. It's sort of a web-based app with a native wrapper around it. So yeah, it takes advantage of all the web-based stuff still. And just on that note of being available on Windows and Mac, it's another big advantage of why a lot of people are using it these days. Is because it's you don't have to get a Mac to use it. Although I am running a Mac mainly because I just like the operating system, but you don't have to, which is great. The other part to this is that it will run on pretty much any computer that has a decent graphics processor. So it's more graphics processing intensive. So it's more like because that's what the browser uses mostly, than it is like memory or anything like that. Although obviously it still uses memory. It is an application after all, but it is more graphics intensive. So when you're buying a computer, you don't have to, for example, with like Photoshop and After Effects and any of the Adobe software, I usually ramp up my RAM when I'm going to buy a computer because of that. With Figma, I haven't really had to. I run it off of my iPad. Like that's another big bonus, is because the iPad is so powerful and it's got a really good browser these days, thanks to iOS 13. It's actually a pretty good alternative if you wish. All right, so enough talk about like what Figma is. Let's actually talk about the structure of a Figma like document. So let's dive into Figma here. And we'll start off by looking at like the actual canvas itself, like the actual app itself. So the app itself is broken up into three main components. So we've got our layers list over here, right? So in our layers list, we have layers and assets. And we also have our pages. So we can actually create pages. And I'll get back to pages in a minute. And then in the middle here, we have our canvas. And then on our right-hand side here, we have our properties panel. So in a blank slate like this, it's kind of boring. So let's actually go to something that I'm working on for Designlab, which will be coming up in a new tutorial later on. This here is sort of like what sort of happens after a while when you start to play around with it. So as you can sort of see here, if we go to our if we toggle this up, we've got our layers here. So you can sort of see that it consists of a whole bunch of different things like images, things like text, things like frames, and so on. And again, I'll come back to frames. But what we sort of have here is now a list of assets as well. So this is things like your components, so reusable items that you're going to be using on your design. So for me, in this particular instance, it's my icon set, it's my logos, it's the components that I'm going to be using. So like my buttons and my checkboxes and so on and so forth, right? So so that's our sort of like layers panel. And we can also sort of change the view here, show as a list. We can also look at libraries. Libraries I'll get into in a later webinar, because I think this is more of an advanced feature, because it involves like things like teams and collaboration on another level. But yeah, so that's the assets like part of this panel. And then we also have pages. So pages is really interesting. This is sort of like in Sketch, there's a concept of pages as well. And in pages, what you're able to do is you're actually able to create complete, almost new documents within the same document, which is kind of crazy. But let's have a look at what I mean by that. So in this situation, I've got tokens. So I've got my colors, I've got my typography, I've got my spacing, and I've got my whole bunch of like working notes and all kinds of other stuff here. But if I go to my assets, you'll notice that it's a completely different page. If I zoom out, it's like a completely different document altogether. And if I go to components, same sort of thing. It's a completely different document. The great thing about this is because it's in the same document, like this is a different page, but in the same document. What this is allowing me to do is gain access to things like the header, gain access to things like text styles and layer styles and colors and all that kind of stuff, other components that I've been using. So the assets library and all that kind of stuff is being shared across all of those pages. You don't have to recreate this. Because what I find generally is when I'm teaching some of my students, they tend to create a whole nother document, right? They come in here and they just create another document here. And then maybe they start doing the wireframes in one of them, and then they do the high fidelity in one of them, and so on. So yeah, that's just taking up room at that point. And you can't things together, and it's not as fluent as it could be. All right, so let's dig into so that's pages really. So it allows you to have almost like a mini document inside of a document. So that's what a page does. In the canvas, of course, this is like the main interaction, right? Like what you're going to be doing and clicking on. So like nothing really special there, but that's what it's called, is the canvas. So if you hear me in a later webinar refer to the canvas, that's what I'm talking about. And then over on the right-hand side, very similar to the left-hand side, how we have different modes between here. So we have layers, assets, and pages here. We have the same sort of thing, but design, prototype, and code. So these are sort of like the three levels of the item. Like the three properties of the same item. So for example, let's just go into just a basic piece of text. So this display D1, for example. So this one here is using a style, right? So we can sort of see that like it has all of the different properties that are there. But if I just copy and paste this out here and over here for a second. Where did that go? There it is. Here. So in here, if we detach all of these things, we can sort of see our properties a little bit better. So we can sort of see that we can align things to the left and right and top and bottom and all that kind of stuff. We have like the X and Y values. So the positioning, the X and Y positioning based on the frame that it's in. As you can sort of see in this layer, we're inside of frame 66. So it's not like 5,000 pixels away from the overall document. It's 127 pixels from the start of this. So as I move it towards here, you can sort of see that it goes to 0 and -3 because I overshot there. So and 0 and 0. All right. Then you've got width and height, which are pretty basic. And then we've got the rotation. So as you rotate that, it'll tell you like what rotation it's at, of course. Constraints, again, we'll go into this in a later video because it's too much to talk about right this second. But yeah, we'll go into that in a later video. Then we've also got our layer, and this is our different layer properties here in terms of like if we want to do like a normal pass through opacity or a normal or a darken or multiply. So this is something like that you don't really use that often, mainly because a lot of browsers don't support it. But you can do things like this. So like let's say that I had a red over here, and by default it's set to pass through. So this blending mode, that's what these are called, blending modes. These blending modes allow you to sort of blend like a top layer with its bottom layer. So if you go to multiply, for example, what it does is it multiplies the color on top with the bottom there. So it almost becomes transparent, but as you can sort of see, it's still the same red as it was below. But depending on the color that you have behind it, it will change. So if we change this to like, I don't know, like a blue, it changes there. So this is really handy for a few different instances, but generally I don't really mess around with it that often, mainly because it's not really supported in a lot of browsers. I mean, that's coming as always, like CSS is always evolving, but yeah, that's one of the things there. Then we've got a more basic thing, which is our fill. Right. So inside of our fill, we have a whole bunch of different things. So let's just create another box just over to the side here. In this box, we've got a pretty basic thing like a fill. So if we click into that, we get like a little color picker. So this color picker, usually it's set to default is hex. But what we sort of have in this color picker is we're able to do a whole bunch of different things. So we're able to do a solid color. So as you see, just pretty plain and simple. We're also able to do a linear gradient. So in this case, it's going from gray to gray, but with a lowered opacity. We're also able to do a radial gradient. We're also able to do an angular gradient as well as a diamond gradient. And then we're also able to add an image. And I will get back to this one in another episode because it is, again, like a really, really cool feature, being able to use an image as a fill. It makes doing things like responsive design a lot easier and creating images responsively. All right. And then you're also able to add multiple fills. And you might be wondering, like, why is that important? Well, if you have an image here and then you have also another fill on top, maybe you need to have, let's say that we have black and black, and then we switch this around. So this is set to 0, and then this is set to, I don't know, something like 80%, something like that. So maybe we want sort of like a scrim kind of thing, like what you sort of see at the bottom of websites where they're able to have a bit of text there or something like that. Like that's what having multiple fills on there is useful for. The other thing that we have here is this little 4-dot thing. So this denotes style. I'm not quite sure what the link is there. 4 dots equals style. I'm not quite sure. But that 4 dots allows you to use things like color styles or text styles or layers or effect styles later on. Again, another video. We'll do a deeper dive into that. We also have other things like a stroke. And this sort of like is a very, very similar sort of situation where you can give it different properties and do different things. So let's go red, and we can change it from inside to center and center to outside and so on and so forth. We can add multiple. What this does though is that it keeps the same stroke. You can't actually do multiple different size strokes. You can do some cool effects using inner shadows and outer shadows if you want to help that out. But generally, yeah, you only have one stroke. Again, this is sort of like going similar to what you would do in the real world in coding, where you only have one stroke. There isn't multiple strokes. So that's why that's a thing. All right. And then we've got effects. So effects, let's remove some of this craziness here. And let's just change this back to a basic gray for now and change it to solid and yep, and delete. There we go. All right. And then we can add an effect. So the effects are really cool here. We have a few different types of effects. So we have an inner shadow. So you can play around with an inner shadow. This is also effective for things like if you wanted to do a single stroke, a single border stroke. So let's say that you wanted to do an underline for an item. You can do that by setting the blur to 0 and then doing a -4. So this is really helpful for things like a tab bar where you needed to underline with a tab bar. Like that's what I use as an inner shadow. So it's not always like just using it as what the default is looking like. You can tweak it to do what you want. You can change it to a drop shadow. So the drop shadow, let's set this to 8 and set this to 4 just to sort of like show you what it's all about. And then set this to like 10. There we go. And let's go to 16 so we can actually see what's going on. And 50. There we go. So it's not a very appealing drop shadow, but it's a drop shadow nonetheless. Then we have a layer blur. So this literally just blurs the layer, as the name suggests. And then, of course, with the little sundial, you can then change how much you blur and so on and so forth. And then we also have a background blur. So by default, that will look like nothing. But let's go to some of the high fidelity pages here and create just a white box over everything. So let's say that we have this box here. If I change this to a white and then lower the opacity of the color, so let's say 60%, so you can sort of see through it. But if I add an effect of rather than a drop shadow, a background blur, right? You can sort of start to see that it's actually doing a bit of a blurring thing. So this is actually quite prevalent in iOS design and macOS design. You'll sort of see this quite a bit. And again, with the sundial, you can then change how much you blur. So let's go to like 50, right? So you can sort of see how that's pretty useful there. And of course, you then just change the opacity as to how much you want to sort of see behind, or if you want to sort of like fog it up and not see as much. And then lucky last is exporting. So again, this will be a different webinar, mainly because this is quite a lot of stuff can go into this export feature. But really, it's the best way to export PNGs and JPEGs and SVGs and anything else that you might want to export as assets. So your icons and stuff like that, or any imagery that you're using. So that's the basic layout of it. And of course, we also have this toolbar running across. So I'll get into that. So this toolbar here, and it looks a little bit different going from Windows to Mac, but it's pretty much the same. So the main button that you want to familiarize yourself with is this little guy up here, this little Figma logo. So this little Figma logo actually takes you out of the document itself and takes you back to your sort of your home base. So on the left-hand side here, you can see that we have a whole bunch of different items. So we have our search, our recent documents, our community, the drafts, and then those are the same. Those are the same pretty much everywhere. So you may not have community just yet. It is a beta feature at the moment as of recording this video, but it is something that is a really, really great product and part of Figma, which I really can't wait to get into. So let me also, I don't think they have the ability to send that anymore, which is a bit unfortunate. So they used to have on community, you used to be able to just ask yourself, you used to be able to invite yourself to community. I think they took away that feature. So I think they're close to releasing that. I'd say in the next couple of months, they should be releasing that. But what community really is a whole bunch of documents. Let me just go back to community. A whole bunch of documents, both files and plugins. Files being that this is all stuff where you can do UI kits, you can do design systems, there's icon sets in here, there's mock-ups, there's all kinds of stuff in here. As you can sort of see, there's things like the iOS 14, because that's coming out in September. You've got things where some of the Figma, Joey Banks works for Figma. He's one of the evangelists. I'm not quite sure what his actual title is, or design advocates. But yeah, he and Rogi do the webinars for Figma. But as you can sort of see, there's some stuff that is by Figma and some stuff that's by big companies like Spotify and so on. So yeah, heaps and heaps of stuff in there that you can then look through and find out for yourself. And then you've also got plugins. So plugins, if you're familiar with Sketch or familiar with Photoshop or familiar with any other design tool, what they do is that they essentially extend Figma's capabilities. So for example, this Unsplash. So Unsplash is a stock photography platform, which allows you to like download stock photography for free. And this is a plugin to use directly in your document. So you don't have to go out of your document into a web browser, go to Unsplash, potentially get distracted by cat videos, and then go down that rabbit hole. You stay inside of Figma the whole time, and it allows you to stay focused. So that's just one very, very boring example. Like no shade on Unsplash. Like I love using their service, but there's really, really awesome like plugins that do like extremely awesome things in that. And again, this will be definitely a whole webinar unto itself because there's a lot to learn about plugins. All right. So yeah, so that's community, and of course you can search and do all that kind of stuff in there. So drafts. So what is drafts? So think of drafts as essentially your messy desktop, right? These are all the items that you started to work on, but then didn't bother to save them to something else. So I have a lot of student work in here. When they send me something, I then get invited to this, and we can collaborate on an item on a project. And so a lot of it ends up here. A lot of this is just me showing students from scratch how to do things as well. So you'll see a lot of like empty boxes and stuff like that. So yeah. So that's what drafts is, and it's usually the place where you might start with a project if you don't know where it's going to be. Now down the left-hand side here is your version of this when you're first starting out with Figma will be completely blank, right? But what I have here is I have all these different teams that I've like broken up my assignments into and projects into. So I've got Designlab 2, I've got Designlab, I've got freelance, and I've got heaps good design, right? So on the Designlab 2, so this is more pertinent to what you're probably like looking for. So inside of Designlab, I then have 2 projects. So I have a phase 1 and then a phase 2. So inside of that phase 1, I then have my my different documents, right? So far we've got teams, then we've got projects, then we've got documents. So inside of this document, then I can have any kind of stuff inside of here. So this might be where I put my like all of my high fidelity design, my tokens, my my wireframes, like everything, my personas, everything that I would do is all in here. So it's all in just the one file that you can then pass around and give access to. So what this allows me to do is keep everything nice and fixed and filed away. It's not sort of like all over the place. It's not in drafts. It's not anywhere else. It's just nice and easy to navigate. So you got Designlab 2, phase 1, phase 2, and so on and so forth. So same sort of thing goes down here. So if I go into this one, so I've got Designlab as a team. Inside of Designlab, I then have the curriculum. I then have my talks that I've done previously, and then I have tutorials that I go through with some of my students. So all that is to say is that work out the way that you would work for this. And this is a really good template for some of your work in Designlab and moving forward as to how you might do it. In the real world, of course, you're going to have a whole lot more than this. You'll have all kinds of projects and all kinds of files that you're sharing around and so on. All right, so we've gone through community plugins, drafts, great. And let's now move on to some of the tools themselves. So let's go into this here. So along here, we've got the rest of our toolbar, right? So the rest of our toolbar, this is sort of like our little, it's almost a direct duplicate of what we have here. But what we have is a whole bunch of like that we can then go through, and you can do a search. So this is really helpful for the Windows users out there, because in on a Mac, you have search built in to like actually like navigate all of this, and then this is there for Windows users, because Windows doesn't have a search to search all of these items. You might be wondering, why is this a duplicate of like this here is a duplicate of what's here? And that's mainly because Figma is usually used in the browser, right? And when you're using Safari or Chrome or Firefox or whatever you're into, you like these items across here are related to Safari, Firefox, Chrome, so on. They're not related to Figma itself. So this is there so that anybody can use any one of these items here. All right, then we've got our cursor. So our cursor by default, and what you'll sort of see here is like the little shortcuts that are available to you. So that's what these little things are. So if you hit V, it'll go to move, scale, it'll go to K, so on and so forth. So moving around is just pretty basic, just what you would expect. So moving around with the cursor, scrolling up and down. You can also hold down Shift to scroll left and right. And you can also use holding down the space bar. You can use, like I'm still holding down the space bar at the moment. You can use this to sort of pan around your design. So this is really helpful for things where you zoom in to something and then you want to sort of like pan to a very specific place. So you're not having to like move that around a whole lot. Your fingers get used to using the spacebar with your thumb to then do that. All right, while we're on the topic of navigating, let's talk about like zoom levels. I know it's all the way over on this side, but it is a handy thing to know. So over on the right-hand side, we have zoom in and zoom out, what you'd expect. Like hitting the plus or minus key to zoom in or out. You also have fit, which is Shift 1. So zoom to fit means that every layer that you have on your document is visible. Which allows you to like quickly take note and take stock of like what you're doing. Whereas Shift 0 zooms it at 100%. Zooming in at 100% is perfect because that's actually the size that your design is going to be when you go to ship your product. So it's often a really good thing to get in your head, is always being zoomed in at 100%. Then you've got 200%. You've also got pixel previews and pixel grids and all that kind of stuff. But again, this is all a little bit more advanced stuff. So I'll go into that a little bit later. So that you can easily zoom in and zoom out of everything. All right. Then we have, we've done the panning and screwing and zooming. Yep, perfect. So the next thing is the region tools. So the region tools here are frames. So what is a frame? So a frame is essentially like a specialized group. Okay. So we have, let's just create a frame here. So a frame in Sketch and in Adobe XD, they call them artboards, and in other design tools, they call them artboards. But frames are essentially like a special group, right? So this particular frame has a few different like things associated to it. So it has like, where is it in the document? It has like the width and height of it, and then it has a fill. But as you sort of like create items inside of it, you'll notice that it's actually put it inside of this frame. So when I move this frame around, it's essentially like a group, right? It's grouped it nicely. So how is this different to an actual group, right? So we have this and this, and then if I hit Command G or Control G on a Windows machine, like what is that difference? Like why is it different? So the main difference here is that frames, like I said, group is a very a basic concept, but a frame is a group plus some extra features. So you'll notice that if I click on this group, I only really have a few different things, which is like constraints and auto layout, right? But as soon as I add auto layout to it, it actually changes it from a group to a frame. So you'll notice that a group is just mainly a positional thing. It's like more of an organization tool, whereas a frame is actually, it has features associated to it. So what you'll eventually learn is that 9 times out of 10, you're actually going to be using a lot more frames than you're going to be using groups for anything else. At the start, you'll probably use groups more often, and you won't know what to use, groups or frames. But as time goes on, you will eventually convert over to frames because everything revolves padding and spacing and alignment, and frames have that built in, whereas groups don't. They're simply just capturing it as it is. So as you can sort of see, there's no way for me to align these items within that group. So I have to click into that to then do that. But it's not the same as if I was to move this over and grab these. If I change this to an auto layout, what I can actually do is change this to a middle align or a right align or a stretch to fit. So you can sort of see that there's a few extra options in here, as well as things like paddings left and right. And then you can stretch things and do all kinds of awesome things with a frame. So then we've got things like rectangles and shapes and all that kind of stuff, like rectangles, lines, arrows, ellipses, polygons, stars, and all that. So I won't bore you with all of those, but most of your design is going to be rectangles and images. Like, that's not to say like don't ever use any of the others, but that's what it boils down to. Even things like avatars, where you might do a round rect or something like that, you usually do a rectangle with rounded corners to achieve that. Then you've also got the pen tool and the pencil tool. The difference between that is the pen tool is a little bit more refined. It has things like handles and stuff like that. Whereas the pencil tool is a little bit less refined. It's literally just like a drawing thing. So you can like scribble and all that kind of stuff. It does get converted into something where if you click into it, it does look the same as a pen tool, but it is a different way of putting that mode in the first place. Then we have our text tool. So we've got some text here, pretty basic. So we have 2 different types of ways of inputting text. So we have just the normal text line. So if you type in text like that, it will start to give you that text that you've just inputted. But then there's also a way of like doing a text block and then typing in. I would advise to not use this way of doing it, mainly because you can actually use this to resize and all that kind of stuff later on if you so wish. Whereas this, if you want to resize to the original size, you have to go over to the right hand side and figure out the right button, which is auto width over there. So yeah, so that's text. And of course, text has properties over on the right-hand side, just like anything else, where you have your font weight, your font size, your line height, your letter spacing, the line spacing, and so on. You also have a few type details inside of here that you can then go to even deeper things like ligatures and letter forms and all kinds of stuff in there. So if your font supports that, like by all means, go for it. So yeah, and then lucky last is our hand tool. And like I said, that's actually holding down the space bar will have the same effect, or you can press H to do that. Now, the comment section is actually part of the overall awesomeness of Figma, which is the ability to collaborate with other team members. So in that, what we have is the ability to comment. So again, this is very similar to like what Google Docs has, where you're able to leave a comment somewhere and say, hey, this sucks, right? probably not that, but just as an example, that I can leave that there for myself and like come back to that at any point in time. You can also do that with other people. So obviously you wouldn't want to like leave that at Kieran Black. Hey, that's not nice. So like we can sort of like communicate in that by tagging people, by giving them an assignment there, and the person who's associated to it can actually mark that as resolved or simply delete it completely. You can also copy the link directly to that. So let's say that to get someone like give someone feedback for something, and like you wanted to point out that very specific point, you can copy that link and then send that to someone, and it goes straight to that comment with the comment open, which is a really, really nice feature. You don't have to say, oh, go to the Figma file and find the comment that I left for you. You can actually just give them a direct link to that exact comment, which is really nice. So once you mark it as resolved, it just dims it, and you essentially like don't have to look at it anymore. So you can also see the show resolved comments in there, and then you can sort of like see what page it was on. So it was in high fidelity pages, and then what was the comment left, and when was it, and so on. So yeah, so that's comments. Then and you also see like the ghost of the icon there, ghost of comments past. And then on the right-hand side here, we have all of our sharing and prototyping capabilities. So this, like you won't see this right now, but maybe let me see if I have one of my students working on one of their like designs. So let's go to, no, I don't think I have any of my students' work right now that they would be working on, but that's all right. Actually, let's go to one of here. Let's go to this one. So this is one of my students' work that they've been working on, and they're not currently logged in. So if they were logged in and working on this file, their little head would pop up here to say what's going on. This is also a really good feature where as they move around, you can actually see their little cursor, again, just like Google Docs, which allows you to also follow them, right? So if they're presenting something to you, so let's say that they're on a Zoom call or something like that, and they're taking you through a design, you don't necessarily need to do a screen capture for that or screen recording for that. You can actually just follow their mouse around. So you do that by clicking on them. But right now I don't have anybody online. So yeah, so that's yeah, like collaborating with people. Then we've got sharing. So sharing, as you can sort of see here, my student is called Andres, and he is the owner of this file. So again, this very much looks like a Google Doc where you have an owner of the document. Then you have other people who have access to it and different levels of access. So things like they're an editor, they're an owner, they're just a viewer, and so on. So you can then do things like this. Anyone with the link can view it, or only people invited to this file can view it. Or you can say anyone with a link can edit it. That's very dangerous. I wouldn't recommend doing that, but you can do that if you so wish. And that's handy for things like webinars, for example, where I might be working on a file and then I might just want to send it out to everybody and say, hey, here's the link. Everybody come join me in the chat, and we'll go through there. All right, and then I can edit this. I can leave this. I can also copy the link to this file in general. So this is really handy for things like, let's say that like I use Notion quite a lot, for example. So let's say that I wanted to get the link, like I wanted to like go straight to this link here. If I go to share, I can say link to selected frame here, and then say copy link. So if I wanted to have this as like maybe I have this in Trello or one of my other like things there, what I can then do is let's just add it to the bottom of this portfolio page. That's perfectly fine. Nobody's going to notice. So if I paste this in here, what it actually does is it says like, oh, do you want to embed this? And I can say, yes, I want to embed this. And I can embed the Figma file inside of here, which is once it decides to load, I then have the link to the very specific frame. So this is insanely cool for things like if it lets me stretch this out a little bit. This is really cool because if I give this to a client, I can give them essentially a view-only like access to this, and then they can like navigate around it and do all that kind of stuff. The cool thing about this is that if I then put a rectangle over here for whatever reason, and I switch back to Notion, it automatically updates, right? So instead of using screenshots and sending around screenshots to clients, like I often use something like this, because it's immediate, and then they don't have to wait for something to download and so on and so forth. Again, really taking advantage of the web technologies. All right, so then we have sharing and viewing and comments and all that kind of stuff. Cool, we've taken care of that. I think the very last thing to note is that as part of like the prototyping feature, this person has set up a prototype here. So as part of the prototyping feature, you can actually share this for like web use, right? So on your desktop or tablet or whatever else. But you can also use your phone to view it on your phone. So there is an app called Figma Mirror, in both the Android, like the Google Play Store and the iOS Store, the Apple Store, App Store, that's the one. So the App Store and the Google Play Store, they both have a Figma Mirror app. So that allows you to connect directly to Figma and see your designs on your device and see if they're the right size, for example, like is the text the right size? Are the colors correct? So on and so forth. So that's it for me. Thanks for listening. And yeah, we'll start off with some questions.
Sweet. Thank you so much for that, Kieran. All right, we will go through the questions if that's okay. Again, thank you everyone for bearing with us. So I will start from the first question that Jed, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce everyone's name. Jed is asking, when there is a bounding box around text that has excess space around it, is there a shortcut to make the bounding box extremely tight around the text?
Yeah, so actually, let me enable screen sharing while we have this conversation, because there's no sense in me trying to explain that, because that would be very hard to do. So this, if we go back to Figma, hopefully you can see my screen. Yeah, cool.
Yes.
So let's go back to Figma. So let's say that we have, a piece of text. So I've just drawn a piece of text, blah, 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 blah. So there isn't a keyboard shortcut. It's actually a mouse shortcut. So if you double click on the frame, it'll actually like minimize itself. So again, wait for that cursor to show up, this sort of left and right cursor. You can also go to the top and bottom cursor there, and it will do the same sort of thing. So if you double click on that, it'll just shrink that down. But yeah, that's probably the fastest way to do that.
Okay, great. Q is asking, what are some plugins I'm assuming that are popular or you really recommend?
Yeah. So straight off the bat, anything that is around accessibility is a really good one, especially as a new designer. So things like Able, Stark, a few of those. Like so Able, for example, what it does is it looks at color contrast between like the text and the background color, things like that. And Stark does that plus more. So yeah, Stark, STARK, and Able, ABLE. That both of those are really great. There's a whole bunch, and like I said, I will I'll go through that as a separate thing, because yeah, we could talk for at least an hour on plugins alone. But yeah, there's a lot out there. There's 1,000,001 videos out there as well, saying like, oh, what are the best plugins of 2020 Figma kind of thing, right? There's a lot of like YouTube people doing that kind of stuff. So if you really can't wait for that webinar, go ahead and do that. But I would just like download a few, see what they look like, see what they do, see how they work. But as you can sort of see, these are the ones that I use on a quite regular basis. And yeah, I swap these in and out, and they all do dramatically different things. Like anything from accessibility to like generating a font scale, to importing After Effects files, to like checking that like all my fonts are the right size, and colors are being used based on my text styles and color styles. So many different things. So like I said, we'll do it in another session, but yeah, I'm glad that we'll have the time for that.
Thank you. Maria is asking, I'm just learning the basics of Figma and notice that I don't have the same options as it's being shown, i.e. gradient background options, etc. Is it because of the version I'm using or browser?
For a gradient background, you definitely should have that, because that is a very old feature. That is not an updated feature. You may have clicked on a different thing. So just make sure that yeah, that you have, like if you click into a rectangle, that you're then clicking into this little thing up here to then change between. So maybe chat to me on Slack, send me a message. I'm in both UXA Foundations and UXA UX Academy and UX Foundations Slack groups. So send me a direct message and we'll try and bug fix that, because yeah, that'd be a little bit of a hard thing to know without seeing what your current predicament is.
Sanjana is asking similar question as Maria's below, or no, someone else, sorry. What's a good plugin specifically for maintaining consistent padding around text?
There isn't. There is, however, like auto layout that will help you out, but auto layout doesn't understand the use of variables, for example. So with color styles, text styles, effect styles, you have the ability to save properties as a reusable option, right? So for text, you're able to save like, something with Helvetica bold at 32 with a line height of 48. That is my heading style. There simply doesn't exist something like that for spacing, unfortunately, where you can sort of save a spacing like variable. So manually, you have to like keep those all in your head. Me in particular, what I do is I actually have, if I zoom out a little bit, I just have my variables that I have here, but I like, they're not doing anything, right? They're not linked to anything. They're just simply a representation of, okay, I'm going to be using these sizes for everything moving forward. So, yeah. Great.
Xiao is asking, where can you look for high quality Figma UI kits right now other than community, since it's still not available right now?
Yeah. And I really hope that comes out very, very soon. But there are a few different sites around the internet. But unfortunately, they are like all migrating towards like community, because they've realized like unless they're paid for ones, that they're going to like, because all of community is all free, right? So the like yeah, so things like UI8.net, I'll spell that out UI8.net. So UI8.net and other sites like UI8.net, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that you can then use. But again, these are all paid for mostly. I'd say about 90% of them are paid for. But really, in a later episode, we will be creating like a UI kit based on like what I was showing you with that food lab thing. That's definitely something that I want to show you how to do, so you don't have to really like go out and find a quote unquote UI kit. You should be able to use a very basic one yourself and then manipulate it into something that you're proud of. So yeah.
May is asking, will community be available for free subscription?
Yep. Yeah. So even with all the projects that I have and the teams that I'm associated with, I'm still on the free subscription. So yeah, I have access to it. And yeah, I don't think Figma would do that, like put that behind a paywall, because their whole thing is allowing the community to collaborate and do things. That's kind of like why their pricing model is better for students. So they allow like pretty much all the features that you would need as a student to be used. And then only when you're working on like a big team project and you're collaborating between like multiple files and you're using design libraries and you're doing all this like crazy stuff, that's when you need to start paying for it. And that's usually when you're working on a team. And yeah, like, so yeah, I wouldn't see Figma putting it behind a paywall. That'd be very un-Figma of them.
Ben is asking, if I download Figma for my desktop, will my work automatically carry over from the browser and vice versa, desktop to browser?
Yep. So just again, think of it like a Google, like a Google sign-in, right? So you're on your computer, you're on your laptop, you're then on your mobile device or your tablet or whatever, or you're at your friend's house and you're doing something there or your local library. No matter where you go, it'll all be there because it's behind a login. So if you log in anywhere, you can essentially go anywhere and start using that. So again, it's a really great feature of Figma itself. The only difference there is that you may not have access to all the fonts themselves. So yeah, if you're not using Google Fonts, I'm not quite sure. I need to test that out. I'm not quite sure how it handles fonts if you don't have those fonts installed. I know if you're sharing it with someone else who doesn't have the fonts, it throws up a few errors. But I'm not quite sure on the same account if you log in from one account to the other, if it uses that local library or not. So I'll have to do some digging. But yeah, you definitely can use the same documents across the board.
Sweet. Mel is asking, would you be able to say how this differs from Zeppelin?
Yeah, so Zeppelin is more of a collaboration tool after the fact of UI, right? So Zeppelin is purely a bridge between two islands. So the island of design and the island of development. So Zeppelin helps you bridge that gap. Figma is closer to something like Sketch in Adobe XD and other UI design tools like that. Zeppelin is closer to things like what's it called? Zeppelin is closer to things like Avocode and a few others like that. You can so for me, like on Figma, if I go back to that, I actually forgot to go through the prototype and the code side of things. But this stuff here, again, we'll go through this in a later episode. But this prototyping feature here actually is like if I create something really, really quickly. So let's just create a frame that goes from here to there, and you've got a rectangle and you've got another rectangle. So let's say that if I click on this and I go to here, if I click on this, I go to here. And then in this, I want to do a smart animate, and I want to do a smart animate here. And then I go into my prototype and see it. It's a very basic prototype, but as I click on things, it will do that. So like having this, like Zeppelin doesn't have a way to translate like prototypes like this to like a developer, like Figma can. The other thing that it does that like what Zeppelin is more around is Zeppelin is more about like taking what you currently have on your design document and then putting into a design system like automatically. I personally don't like that. Like my personal opinion on it is to you should be designing the design system yourself. You shouldn't be using someone else's rules to dictate how you're doing it, because that's another level of abstraction from what your developer is going to want as well. So if you do it in Figma yourself, it actually makes it a lot easier. So when you go to export the code, you may not even use like, for example, this rectangle here, you may not use like any of this stuff except for the background color, right? So the same sort of thing with like Zeppelin is that it's a way to share all of your documents with your developer. But again, like as I sort of showed you with commenting, sharing that exact frame and so on and so forth, you're actually able to do a lot of like what Zeppelin does out of the tin. So you don't really have to like add another level of abstraction from there. You definitely can if that's the way that your team works. Like go for it. But personally, I don't see the need. I haven't needed to use Zeppelin since I've made the switch to Figma.
Awesome. A couple of students have asked, first of all, is it possible to import from Sketch into Figma, and how?
Not really. So for example, let's quickly just like have something open. Let's hide that and let's go to Sketch. Why is Sketch taking so long? So let's open up a new document and let's just create a bunch of rectangles, right? And then we've got a thing here. So if I was to copy this, like the artboard, for example, and I try to in, it will just paste it in as a PNG, right? So it doesn't take over any of the layers, doesn't do anything there. If I was to save this, so if I go File, Save, and then save it to my desktop on my Mac, yep, perfect, save. Let's just call it Sketch Test and save. And then if I went to my Figma thing and then said import, and then went to my desktop, it will try to do something. And then we go done. And then we double click into it. And then it will do its best job, but it may not get everything exactly right. So this, like, it will try to do as best as it possibly can, but there are some things that Sketch does that Figma doesn't, and then you'll find that out very, very quickly. But yeah, that's how you would go about it. I'm not sure how it deals with multiple pages. So let's actually create a multiple page, and let's create the same artboard, but on a multi-page, and create this as maybe red or something like that, and save that again. So again, go back to repeat those steps, click on the little Figma icon up the top right here, inside of drafts, you can click the little import button up the top right, import the sketch, and then go open. And yep, hit done. Of course, like that took like all of 2 seconds because it was very much a very small file. But if you have a lot of images and all that kind of stuff, it'll take a lot longer. Okay, it is actually importing both page 1 and page 2. So that's actually really good. So yeah, it actually is working a lot better than I thought it would. I haven't really needed to do that much sketch conversion. So I was finding out as much as you were just then. So yeah, that's how I would go about it. So yeah, it tends to work pretty flawlessly. I can't guarantee any harder documents than what a couple of squares will work. But yeah, that's how I'd sort of start off with. Simply copying and pasting from Figma to Sketch or Sketch to Figma will not work too well. But
Sweet.
importing will.
Steven is asking, is there a design system documentation feature in addition to the UI libraries feature in Figma? Is Figma holistic in this approach?
No, and I don't think any design tool is doing a bang up job on that. Mainly because there's so many different ways to create a design system, right? Like the fact that, well, if we look at the way that we code a design system, right? So the end product, like there's no way to sort of like figure out that, right? Because everybody's using different frameworks like React or Angular or Vue or whatever, or just plain vanilla. Whatever they're sort of like using, that affects how the system is created. There are some things that we can all agree on, right? So like going back to Food Lab, for example, we can all agree that we need tokens, for example. But how we name those, what level of abstraction that we have to those are all different depending on the design system. We can all agree that we need assets, but again, like what naming conventions, what colors are associated to them, like so on and so forth. How do we, are they components technically? Because you would then use like colors, you'd use tokens to then change aspects of those. And then things like components, and then that's like a whole nother level, right? Like that's another thing, right? Because you have things like states and all that kind of stuff. Like, so no, unfortunately, I don't think any tool has a holistic approach to maintaining the perfect design system. And not even being facetious in terms of saying like the perfect design system. I don't think they do a very good job at making a basic design system. They have things like text styles and layer styles, text styles, effect styles, and color styles that get you somewhat of the way there. But things like, so for example, like a token here, I have like my colors, right? So I have my gray 1 through 9, right? But I might want to give that a layer of abstraction on top of that to give them like a different name. So this is the difference between a semantic name. So things like, so if I go into something like this, so yeah, so like the palette name versus the semantic name. So the palette name is like gray 100, but the semantic name, right, is like what you would sort of associate to say, oh, this is the heading color, right? Or this is the text color, or this is the text muted color, or this is the error color, and so on and so forth. So you have semantic names, so functional names that associate like a token to what they're being used for. So right now we only have one level of abstraction, which is naming it whichever way you want to do it. So either a palette or as a semantic. I would actually like to be able to do both. There are plugins out there that are aiming to do that. So I've tried a few. So semantic color sync is one of them. So if you're looking into that kind of stuff, yeah, that'd be a good way to do it. There are other companies out there like I think it was either Uber or Lyft, and they're probably going to shoot me for confusing the two. But it's one of those companies, and I think GitHub as well is looking into how to like they've made their own plugins essentially to do that. There's other things like design linting that might help you. For example, Roller is a design linter. It's not perfect. It doesn't do everything that you want it to do. But what it does do is, if I click into it, is that it looks for things And it's totally not going to work right now, is it? Nope, totally not working. Okay, cool. Oh no, just took its sweet time. There we go. So this associates what you have in your color styles, your text styles, your effect styles, and then it says like, oh, okay, based on that, and then based on the document that you have open, these are all the errors that are associated to it. So you might have, instead of like using the black color style, right? You might be just using hex 00000, right? And then that would appear as an error because it's not linked to a color. So that's what those errors are all about. And then same with text. So you might be creating a text layer, but you haven't actually linked it to anything. So therefore it's saying, oh, that's an error. Like you should link it to something. So yes, in short, no. In very, very long, it sort of works if you build a house of cards around it. So yes, I do wish both Adobe XD, all three, Adobe XD, Sketch, and Figma used their powers to make this more of a thing, to actually like systematize a lot of this stuff, because I do think you definitely can make a lot of these decisions at a lower level without being prescriptive at the end of a design system in the code. Things like tokens, things like assets, and stuff like that. I definitely think you can use that and set those up without having to mess around with your code base. So yeah. Hopefully that answered your question.
Estella is asking, are the available fonts from Google Fonts or from your desktop font files?
Both. So if you, so let's actually look into that. So you have this thing called Figma Font Helper, and it's available. This is a very common question in the Slack. I get this quite a bit, and I have to troubleshoot quite a bit. So if you go into Figma Font Helper, if I can spell today, there we go. So you can use both. So you have the Google fonts that are available to you. So as you can sort of see, Figma gives you access to an extensive catalog of Google Web Fonts. If you'd like to use extra fonts in your Figma designs, you can use local fonts on your computer, right? So that's a pretty apt like summary of that. So in the desktop app, you can use the local fonts. If you're using it in the browser, you'll need to install the Figma Font Helper. So that's sort of like you don't have to like set that up. If you're using the Figma desktop app, you won't need to use the Figma Font Helper. But if you're using the browser, you definitely do. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky for things like there's an app on iPad that is called Figurative, and that actually allows you to use fonts and stuff like that and link to fonts, because in iOS 13 it actually allows you to use custom fonts in your iPad. So if you're looking to use it on that, you definitely can. It's a little bit of trickery and moving stuff around at first, but yeah, eventually yes, you can use local and Google fonts.
Awesome. May is asking, how to use eyedropper to copy text style format, like in design. She mentions that she saw this at another webinar, but forgot how to do it.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm not quite sure of the Windows shortcut, so bear with me. But let's say that you have, let's just create another frame here. Let's say that you have a piece of text, blah, 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 right? This is a heading. Right. And we actually give it a heading. So let's go into our styles and let's give it an H1, for example. So this is an H1 now. And as you can sort of see, it's a heading H1. And then we'll also give it a color style just to be extra fancy. So we've got, it's a gray 9, right? So now what we have here is both a text style and a color style associated to this. So if I go down here and let's detach this, because what happens is like you might be creating something and then you might want to come back to it later on. So let's say that let's just change this to something like completely different. So this one here, let's go to like, I don't know, like 16 and 20 or something like that. The reason why it's done it, it's copied the text style is because it's associated it to the last text, like piece of text that it's used. So that's what it always defaults to, is the last piece of text used. And if the last piece of text being used was a style, it will associate that style to it. But let's say that you were creating something and then you're like, oh yeah, cool, I want that same heading. I want that same style. I want that color. I want everything, right? And let's just change this to red just to really drive home the point, and change this to, I don't know, impact. Or probably not impact because it's a little bit hard to tell. Let's go to iPixel U, right? So something completely different font size, different everything, right? So let's say that I wanted to copy this style to and paste it here. So it's Command Option C, right? And that's a pretty hard one to remember. But if you go into copy and paste, you can see that it says copy properties. So in the Windows version of this, just right click on it and then go to the copy and paste thing inside of that that dialog, and you'll see that there is a copy properties. So that might be Control Alt C, most likely. So copy properties. So I do that. And then I simply select the new item that I want to copy and paste to, and then do the same thing, but with V. So Command Option V, right? So what you'll notice is that it's actually brought over the heading, and it's also brought over the gray there. This also works not just for text, but it also works for items like this. So let's say that I have a color of orange, right? And that is my red 400. And then I also have, maybe I have an effect, maybe I have a drop shadow on that, right? If I do Command Option C on that, Command Option V on that, it brings over everything. Same thing. So yeah, so that's the difference between the two. Oh, that's a weird bug. I'll have to like let some of you know that those effects didn't come through as a style. That's an interesting bug. But yeah, so that's what happens there. Is that you can Command Option C, Command Option V to switch it over. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Great. There are a couple of students asking about Notion. First of all, what is Notion, and then how does it upload?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so Notion, Notion, just in brief, is like a note-taking app, right? It's nothing special. It's just what I use to take down notes. The reason why I use it is because of features like that. It actually is able to take things like an iframe and display it inside of the note. So things like Apple Notes, for example, doesn't have an iframe, doesn't have the ability to include an iframe. So an iframe essentially is a website within a website. That's what an iframe is. So it's sort of like a portal into another website. So this, so that's what an iframe is, and that's what Notion supports, is iframe support, which is embedding that. So when you sort of like see a really common example of an iframe that you may not have realized is like a YouTube video. So a YouTube video, like more often than not, is using an iframe to show, like outside of YouTube, it shows an iframe inside of another website to embed the video inside of that, right? So that's exactly what's happening here. So think about it as that. It's like Notion is its own thing. Figma is its own thing. But we then want to show a Figma document inside of Notion, or inside of any other app for that matter. We can actually copy and paste a bit of code to display that Figma document inside of another web service. So you can do the same sort of thing inside of Webflow, for example. Like I can copy a Figma file and put that inside of Webflow very, very easily. And it's really great for portfolio usage as well. So that for me, so Notion really I use it to keep control of my students and all that kind of stuff. Or that sounds bad. Not keep control of them, but keep up to date with them, I should say. For example, I have all of my students here. I can sort of see where they're up to and what they're doing and all that kind of. And then I can sort of go into Andrew, for example, and then I can sort of see what he's done so far and what he's put in there and what he hasn't done and so on and so forth. So it's a way for us to communicate through a notes document essentially. And then that allows me to communicate on a different level. So yeah, that's what Notion is. And that's how that Figma is going into that, is that it recognizes Figma as something that could be quote unquote iframeable, which is not a word, but the ability to have an iframe around it. And then it goes, oh, maybe you want to have that as an iframe, and it puts it in there by default. So that's why it's super powerful. And again, this is what I use for client work as well, to show what's going on there.
Awesome, thank you. Ali is asking, how do you include hotspots for interactions in Figma to create a clickable prototype? Also, are these transferable when you copy link?
When you copy link.
When you share the link, can the recipient play the prototype?
Oh, yeah, of course. So let's go into this sketch test, for example. So we have this artboard and we have this artboard, and let's just delete those. Actually, let's keep those and then just change the colors to red, and this one change it to blue. All right. So the hotspots. So it's not like InVision where you draw a hotspot around it, right? Because InVision is actually using, not InVision Studio, but InVision, the old product. The old product is using flat PNG or JPEG files, right? So what it's doing is it's saying oh, you need to draw a literal hotspot, as a rectangle around something that looks like a button to do that. But what it actually is doing in Figma is it actually uses the shape itself to do that. So let's say that I click, so let's say that if I click on this one, I want it to go to red, right? So if I do that, if I go over to the prototype, you can add an interaction on there, or you can simply drag and drop this little node here over to the right-hand side. But you do have to be inside of the prototype thing. There is a whole bunch of different actions here: on click, on drag, so on and so forth. Again, we'll go through this deeper in another session. But what that allows you to do is navigate to the other artboard, right? And then same sort of thing. If I click on the red one, it'll go back to that if I do that. So very, very simple and basic prototype. But what it allows you to do is you'll see this little playhead here. And what that means is that this is where the prototype will start. And if I click on play there, what will happen here is that if I click on this and go from red to gray, gray to red, it'll transition between the two there. It's doing an instant transition right now, so there's no fade or anything like that. But we can adjust those. So on click, we can do a smart animate, and then we can do it over 500 milliseconds. So it's a little bit of a slow fade. And then so same thing here, smart animate, 500 milliseconds, again, another slow fade. And then we can go back into this and then click into that, and it slowly fades between the two. So why is this useful? Well, the main thing is that you don't have to redraw all of your hotspots. You can actually just use the item itself. So let's say that this was actually a button, right? And then you click into it and it transforms into this red one. That's really nice, right? You can sort of use that to animate between the two. And then in terms of like sharing this with others, so when you go into the prototype mode, up the top right here, you can say share prototype, and then you can send that to whoever you need to send that to. You can also use things like Maze, M-A-Z-E, to use your prototyping and like have that as a thing to move around, and extract information from the prototype and what people are doing with that prototype. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Is there any way to use InVision with Figma?
Yes, but I don't know why you'd want to. It's kind of taking a step backwards. So InVision was a stepping stone to where the prototyping is now, right? So InVision uses PNGs and JPEGs, like I was mentioning before. So it takes a flat file and then like transitions between one PNG and another PNG. So it's actually slower, right, to load for your user. So if you're prototyping this and testing it in front of someone and they're clicking around on something, if all of your PNGs or JPEGs aren't loaded, then like it's a problem, right? Because it can take a while for it to load each time. So that's something that can come up. Whereas a Figma file is a lot like lower weight because it's using SVGs a whole lot of the time. So it's using vector artwork rather than PNGs. And vector artwork by default is just lighter because it's using mathematical operations to draw a rectangle. It's not using like a bitmap. So it's going to be a lot lighter load of downloading and showing to the user. So yeah.
Okay. Any idea? And this is just you can say that we don't know, Kieran. But
Sure.
When do you plan to share how to use animation in Figma? Do we have any idea if we're going to have a webinar anytime soon about that?
Yeah, so we actually have done a webinar previously for that.
Great.
That's perfectly fine that you don't know about it. So let's go to YouTube, try Design Lab, and I'll put this in the chat for everybody. But if you go to Try Design Lab for the YouTube channel there, oh, no, that's someone else. Why is that happening?
It's Designlab Learning now, actually. Sorry.
Oh, is it Designlab Learning now? Okay, Designlab Learning. Okay, let's go to that.
Probably design. Okay, I can.
Yeah,
animation tools. I found it.
Okay, let's just go to the
animation
video
tools and what they're used
here.
for, right? Okay, great.
Okay. So yeah, so if you let's chuck that into the channel. I think let's chuck that into the chat. Where did my Chrome go? There we go, and chuck that into the chat and paste that in. So nobody has to go through that horror show that I just went through.
Great.
All right, so let's go to the videos here. So there's a few in here that I've done previously. So things like my story previously, how to build your portfolio in Webflow, which UX UI tool to use in 2020, tips for working remotely. That wasn't me. How to create animations in Figma. There we go. So there's also fitting animations into your UX design strategy, animation tools and what they're used for. So this is sort of like outside of Figma, what other animation tools are there, and also animations in Webflow. So a few different things to get you started. They're by no means like an in-depth course on how to use those, but it's just to get you started, to get you thinking about how to use animations in Figma, Webflow, and other tools.
Sweet, thank you.
No worries.
Gloria is asking, I don't know if you've covered this in the beginning, which we did not, but would you recommend Figma over Sketch?
Yeah, so I actually go through that in this tutorial, this little video here, the which UX UI tool should you use in 2020? And I sort of state my case as to why I think Figma is the better tool for that. And it mostly comes down to the collaboration side of things, because I find that as a design tool, they're both amazing tools. Like I've used Adobe XD for different things, but generally I haven't really like given it more thought after like about 2 years ago when I was playing around with it. But yeah, between Figma and Sketch, I lean towards Figma, mainly because of the collaboration features and what you sort of saw with Notion and stuff like that. It just works with my workflow a little bit better. And what I sort of say for you as someone who's like coming through Designlab and like which one should I go for, which one should I not go for? It really comes down to like what you're sort of trying to learn. So with the design tool itself, you'll sort of like notice that they share about 99% of the same DNA, right? They all have a concept of pages. They all have a concept of artboards. They all have a concept of layers and textiles and so on and so forth, right? They all have the same sort of concepts. There's a few like execution differences, of course, but generally like, yeah, 90% or so is yeah, they're pretty much the same. But what sort of like separates it for me is things like the collaboration of working on the same file at the same exact time. Sketch is bringing that out. They teased that last year in November. And then they got a whole bunch of funding and so on and so forth. So that should be coming this year. But who knows? And yeah, like that'll be the like for me, like, yeah, Figma is the better tool for that kind of stuff. If you're trying to learn and trying to like gain access to community and all that kind of stuff, it just has a lot of things that are like web oriented, and they're sort of like their mindset is just a little bit different to what Adobe XD and Sketch are going for.
Sweet. And then we have Gwen's question is, do you find that Figma Slack is better or equal to the Spectrum community for getting help or feedback?
I don't use either, like because I don't really need that. I do know that there's a lot of people in Spectrum that use that, but yeah, it's not a for me it's not a place that I frequent, because I usually can figure out like if I can do something or not. So I'm not quite sure on that one. But yeah, it's definitely like I'll just see what works and what doesn't work for you. So yeah, I can't attest to that because I don't really use either one. Yeah, sorry to be boring. Sweet. There.
Lizera is saying, I keep getting an error message stating the following fonts are not available and need to be replaced in order to edit text. I get this for the Futura, but it works fine in Illustrator. How do I fix this?
Sometimes just restarting like Figma and restarting your computer like often fixes that. It obviously also depends if you're using the browser or if you're using the desktop version. And I would install the Figma font helper either way, just to sort of like see if that was screwing up anything, and then restart again. So anytime you install a new font, you have to restart Figma. Like it sucks, but it's the best way to do that. So yeah, it might come up immediately if you've just installed Futura. You may or may not have, but it may come immediately to other design tools because they hook in directly into your fonts and your local font files. But yeah, the other apps don't. So yeah, just restart both Figma. If that doesn't work, restart your machine. If that doesn't work and you've tried desktop, you've tried the browser, you've downloaded the Figma font helper, you've restarted a few times. If that's still not working, I would reach out to Figma support and see what's up, because yeah, there might be something else going on there.
All right, and Gloria, her question is, what is Webflow? Can you go over it a bit if we have time?
Yeah, for sure. It's a pretty simple one. So Webflow is you may have heard of Squarespace. So it's like a website builder essentially. So Webflow just has a lot more granular and fine-grained control of what you can do with it. So Squarespace kind of gives you the ability to use like templates and that kind of stuff, as well as use CSS to customize. And you usually design the desktop version, and then it automatically creates a mobile and tablet version for you. Webflow allows you to get your hands dirty a little bit more and actually design from a few different standpoints. So it allows you to do things like use someone else's design if they allow you to. Like, because there's a whole, like, very similar to the Figma community, they have a Webflow community, which like they call it Showcase, and then inside of that they have a clonable area. So that means that you can take someone else's design and use it as your design as a base, and then like change that up and do whatever you want from there. So you can do that. You can start from scratch, like absolute scratch. You can start from one of their free templates that they have, or you can buy a template. So you have a lot more options when starting something through Webflow. Then once you're actually using Webflow, you can actually use a whole bunch of different things. So you can, there's all kinds of integrations with like After Effects. There's all kinds of integrations with like Zapier and like all kinds of different things like Instagram and stuff like that, where you can like use different parts of the internet to like generate your portfolio. So it really is just a website builder, but you can use it to do some really cool and crazy stuff in there. So yeah, again, if you're looking for Webflow stuff and like what Webflow is, there is a few videos on the Designlab YouTube channel there. So how to build your portfolio in Webflow, as well as how to create and use animations in Webflow too there. But this will be definitely another tools webinar later down the track of like diving deeper into Webflow and what it can be used for. Webflow itself has a whole university that they just updated yesterday, which is actually kind of cool. But they have a whole bunch of videos on there and courses and lessons and all that kind of stuff. So if you really want to sort of like get to know what Webflow is, the Webflow 101 crash course is a really great way to do exactly that. And you can go through that and sort of see what's up with that. So yeah, Webflow 101 crash course, you can start the course, and then you have a whole bunch of like intro to the designer, or like whatever the case may be. So they, as you can sort of see, they're like 2, 3, 4, 5-minute videos, and they're pretty short and concise, but they're packed full of information, so you can rewatch them and get what you need out of them.
Sweet. B is asking, would you recommend a tool to manage fonts so that it works in any application?
Not really. Like, I mean, like that's a pretty big question, because yes, it depends on like the operating system that you're on. If you're running Windows or if you're running Mac. Like I've never, like I know people that like have a million fonts. I have like quite a few fonts, but like not ever enough that I need something to actually manage all of my fonts. So for example, I just use Fontbook, which is like, it's built into the Mac, and yeah, I've got some like basic fonts there. And you can sort of like, if you, there's some like basic filters of like all fonts, what's there on your computer, and then what's been installed by you. So this usually gets me like the stuff that is installed by me. Then like I know like those are the fonts that I'm probably going to want to look into and use more than anything else. So I don't really need that. Like as you can sort of see, I've only got about 30 or so different fonts here. So it's not really that big of a deal if if some of the fonts get lost.
Great. And our last question from Manazvi. Is Webflow responsive to mobile devices? Do you recommend it over Squarespace or WordPress?
Yep. Yeah. So again, I sort of go about, I sort of talk through that in this one here, in the which UI UX tool to use. And I talk about like I talk about the different things in there, and I talk about like the different things that people are using. So uxtools.co and survey, like the 3 different surveys for the last couple of years. So I sort of like talk about like all the different tools that are coming out and so on and so forth. So yeah, definitely have a look into that look into that. But yes, I in particular, I would prefer Webflow over Squarespace, mainly because I was a big user of Squarespace for a very, very long time, but I got frustrated with the lack of customizability, right? So Squarespace is really, really awesome if you want a website like that day, right? You just want it up and done. You want it to be beautiful. You want it to work, and so on. So it's really good for something where you just need a website like that day. If you're wanting like anything custom or anything to do like extra stuff, like that's when you'd move up to Webflow. And yes, it does do mobile responsive. Like you can, the great thing about Webflow is that you can you can change the design based on the breakpoint, right? Which is what you can do in like normal everyday coding. So yeah, you're able to do that up and create whatever you need to create. Whereas Squarespace, you kind of just do it for the desktop and hope that everything looks good on tablet and mobile.
Yeah. Sweet. That was actually our last question, Kieran.
Perfect.
So with that, we want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you for all of your questions. Seriously, thank you for all of your suggestions of what should be our next webinar. I've noted that Notion, people would like to learn about Notion as well. And we also had for using plugins. So I will let Emily know about that, who's usually running these webinars along with Kieran. And again, just thank you so much for everyone. I hope everyone is being able to stay safe, staying healthy during these uncertain times. Thank you, Kieran, for always taking this time, even though you're way ahead of me in time. Thank you. That was it. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their week, depending on where you are. Maybe it's already Friday. It is Friday with Kieran. So enjoy your weekend, everyone, or the rest of your week. Thank you so much.
Awesome. See you later.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.